So, thank you guys for being here. We're going to talk about how to run a marketing experiment because Pinckney Marketing is a growth marketing agency. So we're going to talk a little bit about what a growth marketing agency is, and then a little bit about why we should run experiments to improve our agency, and then a little bit about the process of how to do that. So just to get started, what is a growth marketing agency? So Pinckney obviously fulfills all of these categories as a growth marketing agency. We focus on the full funnel. We're not just worried about the BOFU, the MOFU, or the TOFU. We focus on everything all the way through on nurturing all of our leads. We have integrated marketing teams, so that basically just means that our digital team is aligned with our creative team and our account service team. So all across the board, we're an integrated team. We have an experimental mindset, so we've run some A/B tests in the past, and we're obviously going to continue to do that in the future. We're really focused on making an impact, so whatever efforts we do, the impact is always at the forefront of what we're doing. And then finally, we are very focused on the analytics. We're in Google Analytics every single day and making our decisions based on what we see. So we talked about making an impact as a huge part of being a growth agency. So where can we make the biggest impact? So first is going to be an acquisition, so acquiring new leads. So obviously we put a lot of effort into the marketing that we do at the top of the funnel, then right into activation. So obviously as an inbound marketing agency, we nurture our leads using relevant content to them. So that's how we kind of get everybody activated. We monetize our leads by making them into clients and providing our marketing services. And then finally, we retain them through our delight phase in the buyer's journey, where we have great client relationships and make them want to stay with us. So I know we're all here to hear about how to run an experiment. So to get to that point, there's two things we have to do before that. We have to know our audience and create our MVT, which I'll tell you guys about in 1 second, what that stands for. So when we're getting to know our target audience, I know that's something that we talk about a lot, so I just want to hear what you guys think of what are some ways that you can get to know your target audience.
Analytics.
Great.
Lead
Yes,
flow.
absolutely. Anybody else?
Talking to your current customers.
Love it. That's all really great. So I have a couple other ones. So surveys, that's one way that you can get to know your customers, find out what they think is challenging about your website or about your company. That's something that we did when we launched our last website, was to send out a survey, say, what do you guys think? Give us some feedback. So that's a really great way to get to know your audience. User testing, so one-on-one or small group feedback is great. Focus groups to really dig in with your audience and get that one-on-one time. User data, so a little bit like what Mike was talking about with looking into analytics, finding out where people are dropping off in the funnel, where people are not staying engaged, and you can see a lot of that in HubSpot as well. And then finally, research, so checking out your competition, looking into industry data, and then maybe even joining online communities to see how your target audience is interacting with other people or other companies. So now we're going to talk about your MVT. So this is something that's extremely important, especially for an agency like Pinckney Marketing, where we all have a lot to do every day. We don't have this overabundance of time and energy to put into additional projects. So before we get started with any kind of experimenting, we're going to want to make sure that it passes the MVT test. So that means minimum viable test. So that is going to be the minimum amount of effort to validate or invalidate your hypothesis. So we want to make sure that we are using minimal resources, minimum effort, and minimum execution before we move into the experiment phase. So just to give you a quick example of what that would be like, so let's say one of our awesome account leads were to come over to the inbound team and say, I want you guys to create an ebook called Influencer Marketing for Beginners to see if our audience is interested in this topic. So that does not pass any of the 3 requirements to pass an MVT. So it does not require minimum resources, effort, or execution. putting together an ebook is a lot of work. You have to obviously concept it, and then you have to write it, and then you have to get it designed, so that's going to be a ton of hours. So before we even move into creating an ebook or doing something like that, we would want to maybe test the idea on social media, see is our audience even interested in influencer marketing? Would they care about something like that? That would pass the MVT test of finding out if that would be a good test to run or not. So does that make sense to everybody? Cool. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about how to actually get into an experiment. So really high level, before we get started, I want to make sure everybody knows what A/B testing is. First, by just comparing it to multivariate testing. We are not going to do multivariate testing because we are not a massive company like Google or Yahoo. So we would want to do A/B or split testing. You might be more familiar with split testing. It's the same thing. The A/B testing is where you're basically looking at one variable at a time, you're running one test at a time, and that's how you're going to get the cleanest results. With multivariate testing, you can do simultaneous tests, but we're obviously not a huge company that is going to be able to run a test like that, so we always want to be focused when we're thinking about running experiments on A/B testing. So here's just the basics of it. You want to do one test at a time, so you're not going to want to run like one test on a landing page and one test on an email at the same time. You want to do just one. When that test is complete, then you can move on to another. You're going to want to test one variable at a time, so if you decide to go with an email test, you might want to just look into only the CTA or only the headline copy, but you're not going to be able to tell what affected your results if you test multiple things at the same time. You can look into things as small as the color of a CTA button or as large as an entire email and compare two emails side by side. So really the size of it can be as small or large as you'd like, but I would recommend starting small and kind of building up to maybe doing like two completely different A/B tests side by side. And then the final thing is, if there's one thing I can stress enough throughout this whole presentation, it's to make sure to measure your impact down the funnel. So we don't want to be just concerned. Yeah, did you have a question?
Yes.
What's that?
So why do we want to test one variable at a time?
So you'll want to test one because you aren't going to be able to tell the what affected the results there. So if you test a CTA and your headline copy in the same email, then you won't be able to tell whether it was the CTA that was getting you more clicks or whether it was the headline that made people want to keep reading and then eventually click through as well. So. Good question. And then just to wrap up on this slide about measuring your impact on the funnel. So with every test that we run, we're not just going to want to see like high level, what was our click-through rate. We're going to want to follow that all the way down and see how that affected that group of people all the way through the sales process. So that's what's going to make sure that we are having high impact with our tests and not just running tests just to run them. All right, so I also wanted to see if you guys have any ideas on things that you could test. I mentioned a few. I mentioned maybe testing emails, CTAs, some copy, but can you think of anything else that you might want to test by running an A/B test? Yeah?
Subject lines.
Yep, that's an awesome one. Yeah, Matt?
Imagery.
Absolutely. You got it. Any other ones? All right, I've got a few. So we have, I just kind of divided it into 3 different sections just to kind of break it down, but within a landing page, there's a bunch you can test. You can do the types of offers that you have, whether you have a webinar or an ebook or an infographic, something like that. You could test the copy, so your headline, your subheader, your body copy, the form fields that you have to go through to download the offer, and then any videos or imagery on the page. And then with emails, you've got your layout, your timing, your sender, subject lines, imagery, CTAs, all of that can go into your emails. And then if you wanted to just break off CTAs into its own category, you can test the placement, size, color, and copy of a CTA. So there's a lot of different things. So we could start by really just being very granular and saying, all right, we've got a green CTA and a blue CTA, which one performs better, and then just go from there. All right, now we're going to get into a little bit of process. So here's a quote from Brian Balfour, who was the former VP of growth at HubSpot. And he says that growth has nothing to do with tactics, it has everything to do with process. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the process looks like for running an experiment. So I got a check sheet from HubSpot and then kind of modified it to fit with what would work for us. And I'll get into each different phase of the experiment, but basically this is going to be the way that we can document how we're going to run experiments in the future. So that way we'll be able to tell what worked in the past, what we want to rerun, and just have a historical view all in one place. So each time you would run an experiment, you just add a line on this doc, and you'd say who's the owner, when you were doing it, what was the structure, and all the way down through your learnings and next steps. So now I'm going to give you guys an example, and we'll go through each of the different phases of running an experiment using an A/B test that Blake ran on LinkedIn. So Blake actually sent these results out, so now I'm just kind of going to break it down for you guys how it correlates with this process. So we have test A and test B. Obviously, this is creative for LinkedIn that has a CTA on it that says get your free HubSpot audit, and then this one has no CTA at all. So we'll go through this experiment from coming up with an objective, putting together a hypothesis, an experimental structure, coming up with some predictions on how we think it's going to perform, how we're going to measure our results, and then actually describing our results, and then finally, what did we learn from running the experiment? All right, so the very first thing is our objective. So what is the goal of running this experiment? Why would we do it? What are we trying to find out? So in this case, it was to understand the relationship between call to actions on a creative for LinkedIn specifically, and we're thinking that that will probably increase the click-through rate if you have something clear and actionable. Our hypothesis is going to be what's going to happen if we run the experiment. So we're guessing that LinkedIn users are going to click on the advertisement that has the clear call to action more often than they're going to click on the ad that does not have any call to action at all. How many of you guys think that that's probably how it would go? Do you guys agree with this hypothesis? Yeah, that's what I thought. Then we have our experiment structure. So if we were to just give this to somebody else at the company and say, hey, I want you to run this experiment, they should be able to have everything they need from top to bottom to be able to run it themselves. So you would just give them a little summary, something like we're running an ad on LinkedIn, we're going to use the same creative, the same copy accompanying the ad, the same target audience, same budget, and it's going to run during the same time period. The only difference is going to be the call to action on that creative. And then a prediction. So in this case, we predict something like we'll have a click-through rate of 0.75% while the ad has a call to action, and then 0.4% when it doesn't have a call to action. The way that you would find something like that is just by taking an average of like what you've seen in the past for ads and then doing a little bit above, a little bit below. This obviously does not have to be accurate. None of us can see into the future, so it's just a solid guess of what you think would happen so that you can have some benchmarks to compare. Next, we have our KPIs. So with this experiment, we were going to look specifically at click-through rate to tell what was most successful. And then we have our results. So as we talked about a minute ago, we thought that having a call to action on the creative would make that ad more successful meaning a higher click-through rate. As you can see, test A had a click-through rate of 0.5%, and test B had a click-through rate of 0.61%. So more people were more likely to click through on that ad that did not have the CTA. But I do want to point out, obviously, I don't know if you guys know about statistical significance, but I just kind of ran this through a calculator to see, is this something like, are these findings as accurate as they could be, or do we maybe need to run this test again, or maybe something similar? So by just running this through a calculator, we determined that test B converted 23% better than test A, but we're only 65% certain that the changes in test B will improve the conversion rate. So typically, you would want to have a successful experiment, you would want your statistical significance to be 95% or higher. So in this case, it was 65%. So what I would recommend from this point is either just rerun that exact same experiment and see if we get different results, or we could do something similar. Maybe we could try it on Facebook, or on like another platform, maybe on in an email blast or something, and see what results we get that time, and then obviously document it in our beautiful spreadsheet. So what did we learn? So we learned that including a call to action on a LinkedIn ad does not necessarily increase the click-through rate, and in the future, like I said, we could try it on Facebook, or just run it again on LinkedIn and see what we get there. So that is basically overall what we learned. So now I just want to give you guys an opportunity to ask any questions that you have. Matt?
How long does an A/B test usually run?
So it definitely depends on the type of test. The ones that in my research I found about 3 days is okay for, is like going to be the absolute minimum that you'd want to run it for. If it's an ad on like LinkedIn or something, I've seen somewhere from 2 weeks to a month is a good amount of time. And from there, you could make a decision on how it was performing and then switch over to running just that one. But it definitely depends on which medium you're going for to make sure that you get enough results to make a decision. Yeah?
If you go back to that one slide where you had your results, and sorry.
Oh, this one right here?
Yeah, so what are those numbers based on a standard, or did you like figure them out?
Yes, so what you can do if you'd like to figure out if something is statistically significant, it's like it's a formula, so you can plug it in. I just found a calculator, it's called a statistical significance calculator, and then you can just plug in your results and it'll tell you.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else? All right, that's all, folks.